There comes a moment when the weight of holding on to someone becomes heavier than the pain of letting them go, and that moment, if you're brave enough to honor it, changes everything. Most people never reach this point because they confuse attachment with meaning and suffering with proof of love. They cling, they wait, and they silently hope that their loyalty will somehow inspire transformation in another person. But life does not reward attachment, it rewards clarity. And clarity begins the moment you decide to delete him from your heart, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because you finally understand that your inner world deserves better than uncertainty, hesitation, and half measures. When you detach, you don't do it dramatically. You don't scream or declare your independence to the world. You simply stop feeding what starves you. You stop repeating conversations that never change. You stop explaining your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding it. You stop shrinking just to maintain a connection that does nothing but drain your spirit. The human heart is resilient, but it must be trained to release what it cannot grow within. The paradox is astonishing. The moment you truly let go, when your energy stops orbiting around him, is often the exact moment he feels the loss. Because people sense absence more profoundly than presence. When you were available, supportive, consistent, and emotionally open, he grew accustomed to a version of you that required no effort from him. But when you detach, the dynamic shifts. You no longer respond instantly. You no longer chase answers. You no longer audition for a role in someone else's life. And suddenly, he realizes something he was blind to before: your value. But here is the truth you must engrave into your mind. You don't let go so he comes back. You let go because you're done living beneath your own standards. If he returns, that is merely a reflection of the fact that your silence forced him to confront what your presence made too easy to ignore. Absence is a powerful teacher. It reveals everything comfort hides. You must understand that emotional freedom begins with discipline. The discipline to interrupt your cravings for closure. The discipline to walk away from what destabilizes your peace. The discipline to build a life so meaningful that his inconsistency no longer disrupts your equilibrium. When you delete him from your heart, you're not erasing memories. You're reclaiming power. You're choosing a future where your self-worth is no longer tethered to someone's fluctuating interest. This process requires strength that most people avoid. It demands that you resist the urge to revisit the past, replay conversation, reinterpret mixed signals, or look for reasons to justify his behavior. You stop investing in potential and start responding to reality. Reality is simple. If someone wanted to stay, they would stay. If someone valued you, they would show it. If someone saw your worth, you wouldn't have to remind them. By deleting him from your heart, you're not closing yourself off from love. You're actually preparing yourself for a deeper, more stable, more reciprocal connection. You're clearing emotional space. You're creating room for someone who doesn't flinch at your strength or retreat from your standards. Someone who doesn't need to lose you to appreciate you. And still, ironically, that's when he may return. Because people come back when you stop offering the version of yourself that required no effort from them. They return when they sense that your emotional door is no longer open by default. They come back when they feel the shift in your energy, when they recognize that your heart is no longer a place they can take refuge in without responsibility. But here lies your defining moment. His return is not the victory, your growth is. When he reappears, you must decide from strength, not longing, from clarity, not fear, from standards, not memories. You must evaluate whether his return represents genuine transformation or merely the discomfort of losing access to you. Most returns are ego-driven, not love-driven, and it takes wisdom to discern the difference. Letting go shapes you. It hardens what needs to be strong and softens what needs to be open. It teaches you that emotional dependence is the enemy of personal freedom. And through this process, you become someone who no longer begs for presence, attention, or loyalty. You become someone who understands that the heart is not a bargain chip, but a sacred territory that must be protected by standards. So delete him from your heart, not to manipulate, not to punish, but to return to yourself. That's when everything shifts. That's when he feels your absence. And that's when you finally recognize your own power. Stop waiting for someone who already showed you their limits, because the moment you withdraw, you become the mirror that forces them to confront the truth they've been avoiding. There is a quiet strength in stepping back, a power most people underestimate. We are conditioned to believe that perseverance equals loyalty, that holding on is noble, and that patience will somehow inspire others to rise to the occasion. But there comes a point where patience becomes self-betrayal, where tolerance becomes weakness, and where waiting becomes a slow erosion of your self-respect. You cannot expect depth from a person who is committed to living on the surface. You cannot expect consistency from someone who thrives on ambiguity, and you cannot keep extending your emotional hand to someone who has already shown you they have no intention of meeting you halfway. When you withdraw, not in anger, not in theatrics, but in quiet clarity, you change the dynamic entirely. You take back the authority you handed over by hoping they would change. You stop bending your standards just to feel temporarily chosen. You stop offering emotional wealth to someone who treats it like loose change. And suddenly, your absence speaks the truth your presence kept softening. People who are used to your availability always assume it will remain. They do not question themselves until your silence interrupts their comfort. They do not examine their behavior until your distance exposes what your closeness concealed. Withdrawal is not abandonment, it is alignment. It is the recognition that you cannot build something meaningful with someone unwilling to grow. It is the decision to protect your emotional boundaries instead of trying to convince another person to honor them. It is the shift from waiting to walking, from hoping to observing, from needing them to needing peace. Most people do not mature from being told they are losing something valuable. They mature when they actually feel the loss. When your emotions are no longer accessible, when your validation disappears, when your attention no longer fuels their ego, they are confronted with the echo of their own limits. That echo is often louder than any words you could have spoken. Silence becomes the teacher they never expected. Distance becomes the lesson they refused to learn while you were close. Withdrawal is not passive, it is deliberate. It requires discipline to sit with discomfort, to resist the urge to reach out, to avoid the emotional traps of nostalgia and longing. It requires strength to acknowledge that someone's potential does not obligate you to stay, that your love cannot compensate for their lack of effort, and that your loyalty should never be given where basic respect is inconsistent. The moment you stop waiting, you start living differently. Your energy shifts. Your thoughts become clearer. You begin to reconnect with yourself in ways that were impossible when your mind was consumed by someone else's unpredictability. You rediscover your own desires, your own standards, your own identity separate from the emotional chaos they created. The fog lifts, and what looked like love becomes recognizable as attachment, habit, or the illusion of what you hoped they might one day become. The irony is that this is often the moment they finally notice. When you stop trying to be understood, they become curious. When you stop offering reassurance, they feel insecure. When you stop chasing clarity, they feel the confusion they once imposed on you. Your withdrawal does not punish them, it reveals them. It exposes their emotional limits, their unwillingness to grow, and their reliance on your effort to sustain a connection they're never fully invested in. People show their truest selves when they can no longer benefit from you. But the goal is not to make them realize anything. The goal is to honor yourself enough to step away from what diminishes you. If they grow, it will be because life insisted, not because you begged. If they return, it will be because your absence forced them into reflection, not because you waited. If they finally understand your value, it will be because they experienced a world without the privilege of your presence. Your task is not to soften the consequences of their behavior. Your task is to protect your peace. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-respect is to step back from someone you once stepped toward with open arms, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood that caring for yourself matters more. So stop waiting. Stop hoping for someone to surpass the limits they've already proven. Stop trying to pull maturity out of someone who resists growth. Your withdrawal is not a loss, it is a declaration. It tells the world and yourself that your heart is not a playground for inconsistency, that you will not negotiate your value, that you refuse to shrink just to keep someone who refuses to expand. Walk away with clarity. Walk away without bitterness. Walk away knowing that your absence will say everything your words no longer need to. And if one day they finally see what you were offering, that realization will belong to them, not to you. Because the moment you stopped waiting was the moment you stepped back into your power. Most people misunderstand detachment. They think it's cold, heartless, or vindictive, as if pulling away is an attempt to punish someone. But true detachment is never born from malice. It's born from clarity. It happens the moment you recognize that the emotional energy you were giving away was not being honored, respected, or reciprocated. It happens when you finally understand that your peace is worth more than someone's potential, that your stability is worth more than their excuses, and that your future is worth more than their inconsistency. Detachment is the turning point between losing yourself and becoming yourself. Because when you stay attached to someone who cannot meet you, you shrink, you bend, you negotiate your value just to maintain a connection that is already draining you. You start relying on crumbs of attention, moments of affection, or brief stretches of effort, convincing yourself that it's enough. But when you detach, you stop feeding illusions. You stop worshipping the fantasy you built around someone who never actually lived up to it. Detachment is not indifference. It is the discipline to stop allowing your emotions to be manipulated. It is the choice to stop giving someone the power to disrupt your mental clarity or dictate your self-worth. It is the silent realization that not everything that touches your heart deserves to stay there. When you detach, you are not closing your heart, you are simply choosing where it should open. You detach because you have finally learned the difference between love and emotional dependency. Love empowers you, dependency weakens you. Love expands your world, dependency confines it. Love encourages growth, dependency clings to familiarity, even when it hurts. Detachment is the moment you stop confusing the two. When you detach, you stop participating in cycles that once controlled you. You no longer react to their mixed signals. You no longer wait for messages that never come. You no longer crave validation from someone who gave it to you only when it suited them. You no longer stay up at night analyzing conversations or questioning your worth because of someone else's emotional immaturity. Detachment is the refusal to keep replaying the same lesson life has already tried to teach you. And here's the truth. Detachment is not about punishing them, it's about protecting you. When someone benefits from your emotional availability without giving back, they become comfortable. They learn that you will always forgive, always try, always reach, always understand. Detachment disrupts the pattern. It reminds both of you that your energy is not a guarantee, it is a privilege. And privileges can be revoked. The moment you detach, you shift the balance. Suddenly, the emotional weight you've been carrying is no longer yours alone. They begin to feel the consequences of their own behavior because your silence exposes what your presence once covered. People become aware of their actions only when they no longer have access to the parts of you that tolerated them. But their reaction is not your goal. Their awakening is not your responsibility. Your only duty is to your own growth. Detachment is a powerful teacher. It teaches you to trust your boundaries. It teaches you that walking away is sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself. It teaches you that strength is not in holding on, it is in letting go of what harms you. It teaches you patience, because withdrawing emotionally doesn't bring instant results. It requires you to sit with discomfort, fight old habits, and resist temptation to return to what once felt familiar but never felt safe. The greatest transformation happens not when you cut someone off, but when you no longer feel the internal pull that kept you tied to them. That is real freedom, when your thoughts no longer revolve around them, when your happiness is no longer influenced by their attention, when your mood is no longer controlled by their actions. That is when the authority you gave away returns to you. That is when you become the author of your emotions again. As you detach, something powerful happens inside you. Your vision clears. Your energy rises. You start understanding your worth not as something to be earned by another person, as validation, but as something intrinsic, unshakable, and non-negotiable. You begin focusing on yourself not as an escape, but as a return. You rediscover passions, build new habits, strengthen your identity, and reconnect with part of yourself that you abandoned while trying to hold on to someone who wasn't holding on to you. And ironically, this is often the moment they feel the shift. When your emotional door closes, they sense the emptiness left behind. When your energy is no longer directed toward them, they feel the loss. When you detach, you stop feeding the bond, and they suddenly realize how much of that bond was sustained by your effort alone. But their awakening, their regret, their response, none of that should pull you back. Because detachment was never about getting them to change. It was about changing yourself. Understand this. Reclaiming your authority is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of self-respect. You are not punishing anyone by withdrawing. You are simply honoring your own worth after forgetting it for too long. Detachment is the bridge between the person you were and the person you are. Becoming a person guided by strength, clarity, and self-responsibility. Walk forward without bitterness. Walk forward without regret. Walk forward knowing that emotional detachment is the quiet decision that transforms your life from a battlefield into a sanctuary. Because in the end, detachment is not revenge, it is freedom. And freedom is where your power finally begins. Self-respect grows the moment you stop negotiating your worth, because the moment you no longer need someone's validation is the moment they finally recognize what they were taking for granted. Most people don't lose themselves all at once. They lose themselves slowly, piece by piece. Every time they lower a boundary to keep someone close. Every time they accept less than they deserve just to avoid conflict. Every time they silence their needs hoping it will make them more lovable. You begin by justifying, then you tolerate, then you adapt, and eventually you wake up realizing you've become a version of yourself shaped entirely around someone else's comfort. This is how self-respect erodes, quietly, gradually, invisibly, until you can barely recognize the person staring back in the mirror. But there comes a moment, a breaking point disguised as clarity, when you finally understand that your worth cannot be negotiated, not with sweet words, not with promises, not with mixed signals, not with temporary affection. When someone makes you feel like you need to fight for the bare minimum, that is not love, it is a warning. When someone's interest fluctuates based on convenience, that is not connection, it is dependency. And when you adjust your standards to maintain their presence, you are not loving them. You are abandoning yourself. Growth begins when you refuse to do that anymore. When you stop negotiating your worth, something powerful happens. You straighten your spine. Your voice stops trembling. You stop begging for clarity and start demanding truth. You stop chasing people who cannot match your effort. You stop waiting for someone to suddenly become the person you wished they were. The moment you decide you deserve more, your entire posture toward life shifts. You no longer ask, what can I do to be chosen? Instead, you ask, what does my soul lose by staying here? This shift creates distance, not because you are punishing anyone, but because you are protecting yourself. And in that distance, people feel the difference immediately. When you stop being available on command, they notice. When you stop responding instantly, they question. When you stop pouring emotional energy into someone who only gave it in fragments, they finally see what your effort was worth, because your validation was their comfort zone, and your withdrawal becomes their wake-up call. People return when they realize they no longer have access to the version of you they took for granted. They return when they feel the loss of your presence, not the presence you faked, not the presence you forced, but the presence you naturally offered when you believed the connection was mutual. But here is the crucial truth. Their return is not your victory. Your self-respect is. Stop thinking of their return as proof of your value. Your value existed before they recognized it. Their acknowledgement is simply delayed awareness, not confirmation. When they come back, it's not because you weren't enough, it's because they weren't ready. And when you finally stop needing their validation, their readiness no longer determines your worth. The journey of self-respect is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is a quiet internal recalibration where you learn to choose yourself without guilt. It's the moment you stop romanticizing potential and start responding to reality. It's the moment you stop giving second chances to the same patterns that broke you the first time. It's the moment you stop measuring your value by someone else's inconsistency. Self-respect grows through discipline. The discipline to walk away from conversations that go nowhere. The discipline to end relationships that drain more than they give. The discipline to say no even when your heart wants to say yes out of attachment or fear. The discipline to sit with loneliness rather than accept the wrong kind of closeness. Every boundary you uphold is a seed planted in the soil of your self-worth. And those seeds grow into a foundation so strong that no one's absence can destabilize you again. And yes, people return. They return because absence reveals what presence made easy to ignore. They return because your strength disrupts the dynamic they relied on. They return when they feel you are no longer emotionally tethered to them. But when they return, your standards have changed. Your tolerance has changed. Your vision is sharper. You see them not as who you hoped they could be, but as who they are. And that clarity gives you the power to decide whether their return aligns with your growth or threatens it. The real transformation happens inside you. You stop craving external validation because you have built internal validation brick by brick. You stop fearing the loss of people because you no longer fear being alone. You stop seeking approval because you approve of yourself. You stop sacrificing your values because you finally understand that losing yourself is the greatest loss of all. Respect becomes your compass, and peace becomes your priority. And when someone tries to come back, you don't respond with desperation, nostalgia, or longing. You respond with discernment. You evaluate whether their presence enriches your life or simply fills a temporary space. You choose with strength instead of emotional hunger. You protect your self-respect like it is the foundation of your life, because it is. So remember this. Self-respect grows when you stop negotiating your worth, and people return when they realize you no longer need their validation. But by the time they return, you may no longer need them at all.